if you're going to build something, think about how you want to leave the world differently. Think about your own personal values. Let your business be a manifestation of what you stand for. If we're only focused on making money with our businesses, we're missing a big opportunity there.
Today, I have a dear friend. He's a 3 times TEDx speaker, published author, started a couple of companies, communities, nonprofits, variety of other things that we'll learn today about. And Arthur is an advocate for building with purpose and champion for diversity. And certainly I have felt firsthand how kind and giving he is. And I'm excited to welcome Arthur to the show.
Thanks, Vlada. Really appreciate being here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Fantastic. Well, I want to start with your story in your own words.
So I grew up in a single parent family in rural Northern California, grew up as an evangelical Christian. I came out halfway through college and really honestly, Vlada, felt like I was always an outsider in a lot of my early career. I resorted to entrepreneurship at a very young age, partly because I felt like I wasn't following any conventional path. And in college, I started actually a nonprofit that incubated students to launch their own socially conscious companies. And I became very excited about this idea that, first of all, anyone with a great idea and enough work ethic and enough community can bring their ideas to life. So we kind of debunked this idea that you have to be of a certain age to become an entrepreneur. We saw over 3,000 students that were freshmen in college launch their own companies. We brought this program to 20 different universities, and I just was astounded by the innovation, the generosity, the ideas that were coming out of this community. And so I sort of drank the entrepreneurial Kool-Aid at a very young age. Went off to Google for a couple of years, kind of learned entrepreneurship there, Vlada. I helped launch the education division at YouTube, and ended up starting an HR technology company called Imperative that built a peer-to-peer coaching software. And around that time, founded a nonprofit called Out in Tech, which became a large LGBTQ technology community, about 50,000 members in 50 cities around the world now. And more recently, built a company called Matheson that's DEI analytics software. And after exiting that, decided to kind of sink my teeth in the recruiting world, and have for the last 3 years or so been running executive search firms. And have kind of gotten a chance to, try out running non-tech, non-VC backed startups. Still a lot of purpose, but different business model. And now I invest in and advise startups. And a lot of my joy and my passion is, I think something we share a lot is seeing the next generation of entrepreneurs bring their ideas to life and helping them do so.
So if we think about your path to social entrepreneurship, right? It's clear that that mission and that component of purpose has been really central. So did you come out this way, or did it sort of evolve and emerge through your journey?
I think for better or for worse, at a young age, I just saw business and purpose and business and social impact as inextricably linked. I never saw, starting a business as a job, as just a means to make money. I always sort of saw it as a chance to reflect your values and to leave the lasting change you want to see in the world. And with our program, the Compass Fellowship, it was very much the same mindset that if you're going to build something, think about how you want to leave the world differently. Think about your own personal values. Let your business be a reflection, be a manifestation of what you stand for, And I think if we're only focused on making money with our businesses, we're missing a big opportunity there, And so this is what I love about what you've created, right? In all the ed tech innovation that you've led. Impact was every time you signed up a new student, a new user, a new parent, you were making an impact and you were driving revenue. And I think those two, can be hand in hand, so I know it's a cliche statement, but I really believe you can do good while doing well. And the best businesses are the ones that the fabric of them growing and making more money is actually making the world better,
Yeah, absolutely. And I still remember how I I faced this problem with parent communication. I saw how outdated it was, and I knew I wanted to be the best parent I can be. And I failed at every corner because I was missing all of these assignments, announcements, and whatever else. And then I started doing research. I found how meaningful that is. It's actually 3 times more predictive of student success than family socioeconomic status, actually, family engagement indication. And it was mind blowing how that problem wasn't solved. And so I certainly echo that. So, talking about, sort of that conflict, right? So many believe, and I have to say, right, having built a purpose built business,
Yeah.
I have a lot of scars from primary education,
Yeah.
right? It is a tough nut to crack, right? And with all of its problems, have you experienced that scaling and building a company with this bigger social purpose and doing good? Do you think it's more difficult or less difficult, or was it my tech sort of dimension that made it perhaps more challenging?
I think it absolutely can be more difficult. One thing I have to say, there were times in my entrepreneurial journey where the people I was building with and myself we were so captivated by the purpose, the mission, the chance to make an impact and innovate. Sometimes we were actually ahead of the market, right? We were too early. And that's not a great place to be in, where you're not fully achieving product market fit because you're so far out there, right? And I do think this is sometimes an innovator or a social enterprise leader's dilemma. I think when you're oftentimes thinking so progressively about where the world can be, it sometimes is hard to sort of meet the world where it is today, right? So that was something I definitely learned was, to try and have some patience, try and understand, if the vision is to get to C, we might need to start with A and B first. It was also, I think it really disciplined about repeating the same thing and not having to constantly reinvent yourself as a product. I think sometimes the social entrepreneur can be very interested they can get bored really easily and want to always solve the next problem. And that might mean, starting and handing the business off. And in my first case, I was able to kind of successfully exit and find great new leaders to scale after I was there. It also might mean that you have to just discipline yourself to say, look, we're going to continue to repeat the same thing until we achieve the scale we want. And I'm here along the ride to do so, But I think a lot of times, between constantly innovating and constantly getting bored, that can be a real challenge for folks that are in that position.
And I wonder, as sort of going back to how you measure, right? How you measure business results, we all know, right? So you obviously have your growth metrics that might be more important at some time, profitability, unit economics, right? MRR, retention, whatever else, right? But when it comes to impact, like if you look back at your companies and OKRs or whatever methodology you use, like was there a social metric specifically measuring what you are accomplishing?
Yeah. Well, so for Imperative, we were very much at the helm of trying to redefine basically the metrics for success at work. And our thesis was that employee engagement is not enough in terms of measuring people's well-being at work. We need to look at something greater. We need to look at their fulfillment. We need to look at their sense of purpose, their sense of meaning in their jobs every day. And so one of the things we did as a company kind of, around thought leadership is we pioneered a new set of metrics. And in doing so, we had those metrics become the barometer for how we measured our own success. And so we were looking at, what's the total number of employees we're engaging, similar to your business, right? Like the total number of users. We were looking at what's the overall fulfillment and meaning of users that are on our platform. What's the social connection that they're making when they're using it? Are we seeing any impact in productivity and collaboration and some of the metrics around how people relate? And we would not only try and introduce those metrics as KPIs that the broader ecosystem could adopt, but we were trying to measure ourselves against them in terms of the efficacy of our own product. And that was kind of neat because it was elevating the conversation, but it was trying to step into how do we ensure that you can see ROI in licensing this.
Yeah. And what I also love about this is that you measured yourself the same way sort of you suggested your customers measure themselves, right? And sort of their efforts, right? And sort of that aligned your incentive. And we did something quite similar at ClassTag where we were measuring percentage of connected parents. And so we were looking at out of all parents on the platform, what percentage is connected. And we had certain definitions of activity and two-way engagement. And then we could then advise a school as to what their connectivity percentages should be. And they start, in one place and where they should aspire to go and kind of what are the milestones and ways to get there. So that's.
I love that. I love that. And it's a perfect way that you also have, a necessity to continue using the product, right? Because your metrics are somewhat proprietary, right? I think that's a clever way to, I think emerge as something unique, but also indispensable in these situations, right?
Did you have a situation when sort of you had the conflict? You had to decide very clearly, are we making money or are we making an impact?
Yeah. There were times, well, first of all, I think in the early days of Imperative, we often were taking service revenue, while the product was getting developed. And I think we were at times optimizing for short-term revenue versus long-term sustainable revenue. So that was an interesting issue. And I think part of, when you have something that's such an emerging product that the market's still, gaining awareness around, there's constantly that challenge of, how do we decide to pay the bills? Is it always going to be through the scalable revenue, which we would hope for, or do we often get creative and deliver something that's different, that might pay the bills, right? So we ran into that challenge. The interesting thing is we never had an issue where we had to say, are we going to sacrifice our values to make money? Or are we going to, are we going to have to starve ourselves in the sort of spirit of our mission? That was never an issue. And the good thing is we saw people pay for what we were delivering. But I have, mentored entrepreneurs that have had that challenge where they've had a mission that they set out for. They've had a core set of values, and it oftentimes has involved pivoting their business model, to stay alive. And we've seen them kind of go back on a lot of their core mission, partly just realizing that the way that they were solving the problem was not something that the market perceived to need. And that's an issue, right? Because we can have the best mission in the world, but if it doesn't make money, the business isn't sustainable.
Right. You can't accomplish it, right? Because nobody's going to fund it and you're going to run out of money pretty fast.
So, to give you an example, I've seen ed tech entrepreneurs completely pivot and become, infrastructure SaaS companies, and different problem, right? I think there's a way to connect a mission to it, but they've often struggled philosophically with, wow, am I selling myself out in pursuit of building a successful business? And I do think that's an interesting question to ask is, is this business that you're working on, what's the driver here? Are you doing this to just be an entrepreneur? Or are you doing this because you do, want to see a change in the world? And, as sometimes there isn't product market fit in the first direction that you chart, right? And you have to decide, how do I go about, addressing that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it is that I have to build a different type of company, and that's okay, right?
Absolutely. And I think an example in my own entrepreneurial journey has been around sort of creating these win-win-win business models. And so, for example, what we did, having a free product, because the last thing I wanted was to charge teachers who already are pretty short on their compensation, right, and spending on supplies. And so we allowed brands to sponsor these classrooms of parents and teachers, the virtual classrooms we had on ClassTag, and portion of the proceeds we contributed to the classrooms for supplies. And so
I love that.
We created this ecosystem when we were leveraging the brands to pay for the free service, but also contributing to the teachers. And so the more engaged the teachers were with the parents, the more supplies they could receive.
I love that. It's a great, and that's a genius model. And by the way, it's what teacher would say no to that, right? That seems like it's just a no-brainer, right? And if brands are willing to make that kind of investment, then everyone wins. I think that's a great model.
Absolutely. And the best part of that is actually now we just launched Class Media, which helps other entrepreneurs in education replicate this model and get these valuable brand connections to support their communities. So that's the next impact journey continues on that front as well. But so we talked about nonprofit innovation, for-profit innovation. Can you talk about sort of maybe the, design principles or sort of how do you think about both? And as you said, they go hand in hand, but are there really differences there?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I know everyone has a different take on this. I'm of a core belief that if you are an entrepreneur, you can show up and be an entrepreneur in a lot of different mediums. And so some of my favorite entrepreneurial individuals are in the government right now, or they're running a nonprofit, a 501c3, or they're running a foundation, or they're running, a for-profit social benefit corporation, right? I'm less, sort of centered around what is the structure of your organization. I think that really depends on how you plan to capitalize. So we, Out in Tech came about, when, way back in the day, one of my employers, that I won't name here, we wanted to host an LGBTQ happy hour, and they told us that we couldn't invite a whole series of companies because they had some relationship with them and they didn't want their employees at an event under their name. So they told us to launch our own organization if we wanted to be inclusive of these companies. And that was really largely how Out in Tech came to be. We realized that this was an organization that could get sponsored by other companies and could have a whole philanthropic arm and could give scholarships, and building it as a 501c3 nonprofit was, I think, the best way to get it structured. But what I like about, pursuing any path like this is, the same, core design principles of achieving product market fit, building something that can scale, productizing what you're doing applies to the way that Out in Tech has developed. And to the community's credit, while I was part of, getting it off the ground, the community itself has innovated and brought it to these amazing new heights. There's a digital core of engineers around the world that build websites and technology for, developing nations that are trying to do LGBTQ advocacy. There's a mentorship program that, and a scholarship program that gets at-risk LGBTQ youth into boot camps and into universities, and so many amazing innovations that came out of the community. We didn't even come up with them. But what I like about it is, so many of the same design principles around identifying a need, around validating and testing it, around, achieving, so-called product market fit, and then scaling, really came to life through this nonprofit, right? So it gave me a lot of assurance that, in this entrepreneurial journey, you might wear many hats. We both have friends that have sold their businesses and are now running for school board here in Miami. And I love that, right? Like they're applying an entrepreneurial mindset to the way that they're running for a public office. That's incredible. We need more of that, right? So I think my aperture has really opened up around the way in which you can be entrepreneurial, the different mediums through which you can kind of innovate.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. I think one path is to have a mission-driven business, but if you don't necessarily have a mission-driven business, there are many ways that you could also be a mission-driven entrepreneur just outside of your core business, right? And there are so many ways to do that, as your great example, building this community that is over 50,000 members. That's incredible, right? And globally, or even doing campaigns, right? And I know a lot more businesses now are starting to do that when they incorporate, even in their affiliate program, the way that they partner with someone, that idea of giving back, right? And sort of it can take different shapes and forms, right? But ultimately, I think if doing good is important to you, you'll find a way.
That's right. You really will. You really will. And I think it's neat to see that energy can be applied in so many different contexts. And again, I think you are the entrepreneur. It's not the organization where you find yourself that determines whether you're an entrepreneur. It's a mindset, right?
That's it. It's a mindset. Once entrepreneur, always entrepreneur, right?
That's right. That's right.
So going back to when you were not entrepreneur yet, and sort of earlier stages, and we touched on product market fit, which is, I think, my favorite subject of all, because once you figure that out, then everything else sort of falls into place. But first, sort of, how do you decide which idea to pursue, right? There are some people who are paralyzed because they say, well, I could be 50 different things or 100 different businesses, and then they do nothing because they can't figure out what to do. So tell me about kind of your know-how and lessons learned there?
So I will say that throughout my journey, there were times where this answer happened very organically and sometimes not in a super linear way. If I were to, now that I step back, like when I look at out in tech, it came to be because there was literally a need where we needed an organization to host an event, and the place that we were at would not let us do it. So it came out of like this very natural need that we saw. Other times, I've used the model of Ikigai. You might be familiar with the Japanese model that kind of asks you, what are you best in the world at, or what are you best at? Where do you derive the most fulfillment? And basically, what does the world need, right? And when you look at the alignment of those things, I think you start to get some really good centering around. I always try to ask entrepreneurs, what are your superpowers? Entrepreneurs, as you know, Vlada, are great at wearing many hats, but there are also things that they're best at. There are also things that energize them. I know we're capable of doing everything, but when you get up in the morning, what are the types of things that really wake you up, and energize you? And then I think we start to, really be able to test the market around what does the world need? And sometimes I think we can answer that question by even just reflecting on our own issues, our own gaps. For the out in tech example, it was very much this is a need we're seeing, and we can turn the dial on ourselves. In other cases, I've interviewed 50 customers to start answering the question of what problem can we solve for you? In the case of Matheson, we saw a very manual DEI consulting space that was doing work that wasn't very scalable, and we realized we could create software to scale it and make it efficient. And that people could pay for it, and there was a market for it because they were already paying consultants, and we could largely systematize and automate a lot of the functions. But I like starting more personally. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, as you know, are constantly just out searching for ideas, and they're not reflecting on themselves. They're not holding up the mirror and wondering, okay, fast forward 5-10 years, is this the thing I'm going to be passionate to wake up and work on? If the answer is no, then don't do it right now. Right? I think so many entrepreneurs love the idea of being an entrepreneur and miss the fact that you are living and breathing whatever you're working on for years and years. And you better love it, because you're literally going to be sitting next to it and thinking about it when you go to bed and thinking about it when you wake up. Something not a lot of people have talked about. I think you and I have talked about it in passing. I think there's an unspoken truth that a lot of entrepreneurs are chained to their idea right now. They feel completely stuck. They don't want to admit that they don't love what they're working on. They've got to pretend to everyone else that they love it, that they want to continue working on it, that they're motivating their teams and investors around it. And sometimes they're not in love with it. So I really think that self-reflection and awareness up front is key to make sure that we want to go all the way in whatever we're working on.
Yeah. 100%. And a phrase I recently heard, which I think summarizes nicely what you were describing, is what is your uniqueness in the service of others? Right. And so I think that, this Ikigai framework was sort of, goes back to superpower, uniqueness, right? Like if you can answer that question. And the other thing that I've recently learned, which I thought was great, and I think that what prompted me to start the business I'm about to start, is you are best positioned to serve the people you once were.
I love that.
And I think that can help a lot of people as well, as especially if they think about sort of transformations, right? You once were or are, right? So for example, I was solving my problem as a parent back then. Now I'm excited to support entrepreneurs anyway.
I love that so much. It's such a great way to frame it. And I think sometimes, you and I have chatted a little bit about this, but I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we don't even realize how many rich examples and things that we've been through that at the time felt like a crisis, and later on are an amazing learning and case study for someone else. Just all the little things along the way, that the unexpected situations and occurrences that happen are actually very valuable for someone else to one day hear about and learn from. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why, I'm not only inviting successful entrepreneurs who've been there and done that, but also those that are really open about sharing what those challenges were, right? Because as you said, right, there is a lot of pretending. And I did I'm guilty of raising money, pretending like I have a lot in the bank account, knowing that, that I don't, right? And so you have to play the game, right, in some ways. And so that trains you to live in that parallel sort of reality. But I think one person you don't want to be lying to is yourself, especially if you're starting the business. So I think that's a great reminder, Arthur, to be mindful of looking at AI trends growing, etc. Of course, you want to make sure that the market is there and growing, but you have to start from within.
That's right. And let's make no mistake, it's a very challenging path. It's a very fulfilling path, but it's certainly not without its challenges. And so, I think the more that folks are ready for that and feel a sense of strength and deep conviction and connectedness to themselves, the more resilient they'll be in the inevitable challenges they're going to face in it. Right.
Absolutely. And I did take two notes that I want to come back to. So one note is related to what you said, right? Some businesses were, when you were in a service business, you were in market, and then you sort of already knew more organically, right, what the problems are, the budgets existed, and sort of you build that kind of customer value map, right, the pain, the budget, and your solution to solve it. In other case, what I loved about what you said is that you were going to a group of people or certain titles of people and asking them about their problems, right? You were not coming to them with a solution. So did you first decide that this is the group of people you want to serve as your next business, and then you went and studied their problems? So tell me a little bit more about that scenario, because I think that's a very strategically smart scenario, and I want to learn from you.
So with Imperative, we were selling to heads of HR, and we got to know them intimately. One of the things that we got to know progressive heads of HR. So I would put them in the innovator and early adopter, sort of section of the adoption curve, right? And I'm always a big fan of selling to those folks. They're going to be the first to get on board, and they're going to give you great feedback, and they love being part of, innovative community. In getting to know that buyer really well, it gave me a lot of insight around their needs, specifically as it came to DEI. And that was what helped get our company Matheson off the ground. I will say there's one challenge with the going to a group and asking them what they want, because there's the adage that we've always heard. If you asked a person in the early 1900s what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So I think sometimes if we're going, completely from scratch and asking people what they want, you're going to go in so many directions. I think this is a great opportunity to sort of narrow in on, again, where are you at your best? What are the types of problems you want to solve? What's a thesis you already have, right? And that could be, even just thematically, inefficiencies that you're seeing or things that you've heard that you can build out a little bit to get people to react to. So when I went into a lot of these customers, I said, look, I see that you're doing these diversity strategy engagements where people are coming in and doing this comprehensive audit. It feels like it's taking forever. It's very expensive. If there was a way to systematize that process, how valuable would that be? And a lot of people said it would be very valuable, and we would pay X amount for it. And that was enough for us to say, great, let's build the MVP literally in a Google spreadsheet, right? And then let's take it and validate it. And then as we validated it, it became a product, right? And it was a very lo-fi way to test our assumptions and narrow in on something. And so we didn't go to them asking, what do you want? We went and asked sort of, is this a problem? Would this solve it? What are your thoughts, right? So I've seen that to work really well. I do think a lot of entrepreneurs will wrap around the axle when they have these open-ended conversations. They have all these sticky notes against the wall, and they're like, gosh, what do I do? Where do I go?
Businesses to start here.
Yeah. And it's, you can quickly lose people's attention if you're just everything for everyone in every conversation in 17 different directions,
Absolutely. And what are some techniques that you use? Sounds like you, and then I'm curious about sort of that kind of product market fit. Did you stay with it? Did you continue being close to customers as you got your first sales in? And sort of what was the role of that sort of customer engagement to make sure that you continue to build truly what they love?
So something I found to work really well, first of all, was setting KPIs up front that they would use to measure success of the product. I think one of the things I definitely learned is that you will get customers signing up early, and largely what they're signing up for is belief in you as an individual and not always belief in your product. And I made the mistake sometimes of believing a market was further along when they were oftentimes buying charisma and connection, and the product itself was not adding as much value as I thought. Right? When they were up for renewal, it was largely relationship driven, and it wasn't. The product is completely indispensable for us, right? So I think it's really important to suss that out. And it's great that people, buy in early. I think in the early days, kind of like a friends and family round with VC, right? Your early customers sometimes are going to sign up for a really nascent product, and it's largely because they believe you'll deliver something, and they're investing in you as an individual, and that's okay, right? That we need our first customers. I think my first couple customers always were the ones that kind of took a bet on me, But I will say that what I found to work really well is to build a product advisory council of trusted customers that will be open to giving you extremely detailed feedback, and they have no reason to be dishonest with you. Even in a customer relationship, it's like a lot of folks, as you know, don't like to give feedback. A lot of folks are afraid to give constructive feedback because they're afraid of hurting feelings. So when you have this dedicated group of target customers that are there just to make the product better, I found that's a really great way to get insight. I love doing user testing. I think the ability to observe users in the act of leveraging your product, and to see where they're confused, where they're hung up, where they see opportunities, I think that's a really rich way to go about getting insight. And finally, I would say that, I went about oftentimes trying to get feedback from folks that told us no. And I really wanted to know why, right? It's always great to go to the folks that are, advocates, but yeah. But I think it's important to know, why did we lose this deal? What are our competitors doing that we're not doing? What is it that wasn't perceived value for you? Can we use those insights to design around how we expand this market, or we shift the way we think about our product to meet your needs? And oftentimes I would go to folks that said no, and I would ask them, if we did these things, would you be a yes? And that was an interesting way to win back a customer. Was always a really cool kind of achievement, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's really, really great insight. And you went through it, and it's funny because now that you've done it a couple of times, it feels sort of second nature. But I think so many things that you talked about actually is, maybe every 3 minutes is a course in itself, right? About sort of how to do that. So that's certainly lots to unpack. So if you guys are just starting out, maybe do half the speed or go back and forth. That's a great insight, Arthur. I did want to go to one other area, which is, you are an underrepresented founder, and from LGBTQ perspective, and I perhaps am an underrepresented from a female perspective. And I, as I reflect back on my journey, and I have maybe not a popular point of view, but I almost felt that it actually helped me in some odd ways, that I am underrepresented. And so I still remember in, my kind of big corporate career days when, I was the first, female, or the only female, on the kind of executive team in the strategy department, and, various other opportunities that I've gotten because I was sort of different and voice was different. So I think it as much in my personal experience served me as it sort of perhaps hurt me. I don't know if it would have been easier for me to raise, let's say, if I was not a female. I never tried to raise a man, so I would never know. But how do you think about this? And sort of, did it help you? Did it hurt you? And what do you think we should collectively do with being underrepresented?
It's a great question. And the truth is, I think it's a mixed bag. I think what we've seen in the space overall the last 5 or 10 years is diversity has gone from something that wasn't on the radar to something that was on everyone's radar to something that's being, really emboldened in some audiences and then really sort of challenged in others. And now we're in this place where we have VCs that could not be more committed and could not see the business case and could not be, more passionate about not only expanding their own diversity, but really having a great cast of underrepresented founders they support. And others that have said, look, the moment there was an opportunity to disengage on this level, we will, right? And that's a little disheartening. But I think for me, there were certainly communities along the way where I was in the room with folks where bringing up the fact that I was LGBT felt uncomfortable, right? There were other communities where it was the complete opposite, where that was such a value, and there were LGBT, angels or partners at VCs where it was a really great connection point, and they really sort of saw that as a feather in our cap. Building a DEI company, as you can imagine, it was a major part of our story, and it was also really important that we built a well-represented leadership team and broader team, and that we practiced what we preached. So that was super interesting. I think we're in this place now where, sadly, it feels like we kind of went 2 steps ahead and 3 steps backward in many regards. And I see underrepresented founders, and I've heard even recent stories of women that have gone to raise in Silicon Valley, and the moment that the partners in the room at the VC saw that they were women, they, decreased the length of the meeting. Just super surprising things that maybe aren't surprising. And then, later on, they would go and look at the team and realize there were no women on the team, right? So I think we're still seeing things like that. The numbers speak for themselves, right? Underrepresented founders are still disproportionately funded, less than the broader, sort of well-represented communities. So I think that needs to change. I think we need to see VC become more underrepresented, more diverse as well. That builds a lot of empathy and I think connection when we have individuals within decision-making roles that are, themselves from underrepresented communities. So I think honestly, Vlada, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done there. I'm encouraged by the fact that there are leaders that are extremely committed to the work. And I sort of just believe that there will be bright spots that are our shiny examples. And we don't even need to cast out the folks that aren't doing the work. Let's just shed light on the ones that are doing it, and that hopefully will continue to move the space.
That's very true. And my little contribution to this is that this week I'm actually interviewing female founders every day outside of this interview, and it's a Women's Celebration Month. And so I went out and found those tech female founders, which are not that many, generally speaking. But I want to make sure that their voices are heard and others are encouraged and elevated to create and build the businesses and impact they want to see in the world. So I
love that you're doing that.
That's my little contribution to that. And I think the other bit I did want to mention on this front is I think what I found is, let's say I was entering a room with some venture firm, and they saw my co-founder, who is a taller guy, and they would turn to him and think he's the boss, right? He's the CEO, and immediately like the body language, and he would say, "Hi, I'm Jason. She's the boss," right? And so that was really funny. And I do know that there were some questions I was asked that perhaps I wouldn't have been asked. Like, let's say your row 367 in your model, right? Like, we don't think your math adds up. Like, that's a strange question to ask in a pre-seed or seed meeting. But I was prepared, right? I had a funny sort of answer to that, and how to hold my ground and show that I have my stuff together, and you can't really, just walk over it. And you just need to know what those things are and just be prepared. I think that individually, that's the best we can do to help ourselves.
That's true. And a lot of that is just that you're talented and you do know your stuff. And I think you're right. There are times in these moments where folks are purposely challenging us, and they're trying to see if they can get under our skin, or there really might be this implicit bias that shows up. And you're right. And it shows up in sometimes even the most minuscule ways of just assuming that so-and-so is the CEO. I love that your
Right.
co-founder, by the way, could have reacted many ways, and
Right.
that was an empowering way to respond, right? Hopefully also a coachable moment for everyone else to
Right.
realize, let's not jump to conclusions,
Exactly. It was really funny. And it's been years ago now, but I still remember that because I think for me, in a way, it was empowering too, right? When I knew that I have a co-founder who has my back, and it was very, very meaningful for sure.
Yeah, I love it. And by the way, that's a great example of an ally, right? Like you in these moments, there's a chance to step in and to say something, not make anyone feel uncomfortable about it, but to still use that as a chance for people to learn and grow. And I think inevitably, as our awareness and our advocacy continues to improve, we hope, we will, individuals will step out of bounds, and I've made the mistake of jumping to a conclusion and also ensuring that when I was able to learn from it, that everyone knew that I learned, and that it felt like a growth moment for everyone. It wasn't an uncomfortable moment, right? That's a chance that we all have in those types of situations.
Absolutely. And I know we are running up on time, but I did want to go to one last area, which is really the raw and unfiltered, which usually comes from the main challenges or we experience. And so I would love for you to, for a very short minute, going back to, some kind of the lowest low in your journey. And of course, everyone has them, no matter how many TEDx talks you have or books you've written, and just maybe share sort of now kind of looking back what you wish you had or what support you wish you had to really empower you and lift you up faster.
There was a moment I'll never forget when, in my first company where we had taken out a loan from an investor, and we were just in the very early days, and I had been skipping payroll for myself, and the investor called the loan much sooner than we thought they would. And I literally thought we would be done. And they wanted the loan paid back on Monday, and it was like, I was looking at the bank and we didn't have it. And we miraculously were able to raise a round, and we were able to get things off the ground from there. But I'll never forget just that devastating feeling of, wow, this is about to end. But I wish that someone had been there, and I think someone ended up being there later on to tell me, whatever happens, this is not the end of the world. I know it feels like it's absolutely like the universe is collapsing here, but you're going to look back one day and be fine. This will be a learning experience, however it goes, and you'll find a way out, and it actually happened that way. And I think we've all been in that situation at some point where you just really feel stuck. And it also feels like the stakes are so high. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're going to bounce back. We're going to have those low lows, but we're also knowing that they're going to happen. I think it gives us, some comfort that we'll get out of them. And we're, regardless of what happens, we'll learn from these situations. I think that's a big thing. I'm huge on not believing that anything's a failure. I know there's a lot of conversation around a failed startup or a successful startup. I think every startup is a success because we learn from it, and we are better people with everything that we learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so sounds like what sort of kept you, and when we have more time outside of this, I also have a number of stories like that, of course, like every entrepreneur does. But what lifted you up? That belief that it's going to work out, or who did you call, or sort of how did you? Because that situation can freeze someone, right? So somewhere and somehow your mindset or your instincts or something help you kind of get through.
I think it was one piece of to go to the worst case scenario, I'm going to survive, right? That was one thought process that was comforting. The second was that I wasn't alone. I think the more that I spoke to people, I realized that everyone, even the folks that we think are, effortlessly growing their companies, are facing challenges. So you're never alone. And I think the more that you build your entrepreneurial network, you realize that everyone has these stories. And then I think it was also, a return back to the belief of, even in the tough moments, I'm learning and I'm growing, and reframing what these challenges look like to be becoming better as a person, that I think really changes how you react to these situations. They're not happening at you or to you. They're happening with you. And you know, they end up becoming great wisdom for whatever we do next in life.
Absolutely. And I think as we grow, come to realize that we have to control the controllables, right? We control our reaction to events. We can't control necessarily the events themselves unless you are really good at visualization and whatever other methods you've got. But, focusing on your reaction and knowing how do you react in a way that it's really the most productive that's going to help you get through it. I think it is really a lesson that I learned. Sort of just persevering. And the other thing I would say, and I don't know if you share this, is really gratitude for these failures, if you will, or gratitude for those challenges. And it's so hard now. I'm trying to get to the point when I can be grateful at the moment that they're happening. I don't think I'm there yet.
I know. Really it doesn't make them any easier. I know. And I will say that I feel like every time we go through them, we contextualize them more, and we have like more, I call it like athletic stance. You know, like the first time you're pushed over, you fall over, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to have athletic stance, and I'm going to be a little more resilient when I'm pushed again. But I'm with you. I think it's a very special art to, in the middle of what seems like a crisis, to be able to slow down and say, I'm somewhat grateful. I am still definitely, as a human being, someone who can freak out. And later on, I usually bounce back faster than I did in the past, but it doesn't make the crisis in the moment any easier. I do think the more that we're surrounding ourselves with people that are really mindful and give us perspective, it helps us maybe decrease the stress in the moment, right? People can say, you know what, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. This has happened to me. You've gone through worse, by the way. Let me remind you. Right. I think it's a good reason to have really good people around you, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect wrap for this pod, Arthur. Surround yourself with great people and know that everything works out for the best. And certainly grateful for folks like Arthur who come and share their stories so you can learn from them and know that even folks that are very important, they've been through a lot of challenges, and their challenges are as much part of their story as their successes are. And Arthur, where, if folks want to connect with you, what is the best way to find you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Arthur Woods. My book is Hiring for Diversity. But LinkedIn's the best way to connect.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It was a real joy. And thank you for being unboxed with us.
Thank you, Vlada. You're the best. You're such a dear friend.